The government has issued a 48-hour emergency ban on all movement to and from the nation's poultry farms to stop an apparently growing outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said today the standstill order begins at midnight early Saturday morning and runs through late Sunday night. The ban affects locations including farms, slaughterhouses, and animal feed factories, and it applies to people, goods, and all vehicles related to the livestock industry. 6 cases of the H5N6 virus have been confirmed in the past week. The authorities are testing samples from 2 farms in Jeollanam-do and Chungcheongbuk-do province to see whether this strain could be transmitted to human beings. An official at the Agriculture Ministry's Animal Health Division said the virus appears to have been carried by migratory birds, but they're also looking into whether it was spread from farm to farm.
A meteor that lit up the night sky on Monday night still has a lot of folks in the Bay Area talking. Now, according to the American Meteor Society, 150 people reported seeing that fireball across Florida. Dozens of people flooded their social media timelines with a lot of pictures and a lot of videos of that. News Channel 8's Jamel Lene is joining us now live from the South Florida Museum in Bradenton, where scientists cannot stop talking about this, Jamel.
That's right. Good evening, Rod. You know what, scientists tell me that these types of meteors, they're very common. We just typically don't see them because it usually happens in the daytime or out over the ocean. But Monday night, we got lucky. Monday night, a meteor lit up the sky. Venice police officer Aaron Mungavin saw it around 11:15.
I was driving actually west over to the island of Venice, and the interior of my car lit up really bright, and I looked up, and it looked like there was just a little firework actually just over to my left.
One of the officers captured the fireball on his dash cam.
It just was going down very slowly, and then I drove over the bridge. I saw another officer over there, so I went and spoke to him, Officer Ben Neff, and he said the same thing. He said he thought he was crazy.
Turns out they weren't the only ones seeing things. Dozens let their cameras roll, not knowing they would capture the meteor later. Jeff Rogers with the Bishop Planetarium in Bradenton said this one entered the atmosphere the size of a soccer ball near the Keys.
A 7.0 magnitude earthquake has struck the Pacific coast of Central America. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake occurred around 120 kilometers off El Salvador at a depth of 33 kilometers. It rattled the region just as a hurricane barreled into nearby countries as well. There were no immediate reports of damage from Thursday's quake. The Central American country is situated along the major seismic zone known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. Over the last 2 weeks, earthquakes with magnitudes over 7.0 have hit Japan and New Zealand, both of which are located along the Ring of Fire.
We go back now to our top story about that powerful earthquake which rocked northern Japan early this morning. It generated a tsunami and temporarily affected the Fukushima nuclear plant. The earthquake, which was felt in Tokyo, had a preliminary magnitude of 7.4 and was centered off the coast of Fukushima Prefecture at a depth of about 10 kilometers. 2 injuries were reported. A tsunami of up to 1 meter had been observed around Fukushima following the quake, and that was after a warning of waves of up to 3 meters had been issued. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said the cooling system at the reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant had been restarted after a temporary stoppage, and he also urged residents who may be affected by the tsunami to evacuate to safer ground.
Japan is rocked by a second powerful earthquake in just days, but fortunately this tremor didn't trigger as much alarm as the first. The second quake came Wednesday, November 23rd, off southern Fukushima Prefecture. The Japan Meteorological Agency said the 6.1 magnitude tremor wouldn't trigger a tsunami, but could slightly change sea levels. A much different story than early Tuesday morning when the agency called for immediate evacuations in the area following a 7.4 magnitude quake. Despite the panic, no casualties or major damage were reported. The region is still recovering from a devastating earthquake and subsequent tsunami in March 2011 that left more than 18,000 people dead and destroyed the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Following Tuesday's tremor, all eyes were on the nuclear plant to see if it could survive another disaster.
Massive wildfires continue to rage across central and northern Israel, damaging hundreds of homes and forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate. And the country's leaders say arsonists are to blame.
We strongly believe that the fires could have been started by individuals who fled the scenes. There are a number of reports that we've received.
According to Israeli officials, flames have engulfed several locations for the past 4 days, but the blaze intensified Thursday thanks to unusually dry weather and strong winds. As of early Friday, no deaths or serious injuries had been reported, but dozens of people are being treated for smoke inhalation. Police have arrested at least 12 people in connection to the wildfires. Help from other countries is already on the ground or on the way. The New York Times reports firefighting teams from Greece, Croatia, Italy, and Turkey were tapped to help battle the blazes.
Israeli police have arrested 12 arson suspects in connection with a series of destructive wildfires. Israel's internal security minister says the suspects are minorities, which has prompted many to believe that they are Arab Israeli citizens or Palestinians. One suspect was arrested after he posted messages online calling on others to start fires. The wildfires have forced around 80,000 people to evacuate their homes in and around the northern city of Haifa. Hundreds of houses have been destroyed.
Fueled by tinder-dry forests and high winds, wildfires tore through thousands of hectares of open country in northern Peru. Local farmers and residents said there was little time to save belongings, as firemen did what they could.
As you can see, it is not easy to deal with fire. It is our worst enemy.
Farm and pasture lands were no match against the fire. Firefighters, local volunteers and park guards battled the flames, often without enough water. Peru declared a state of emergency in parts of the country.
This will permit the national government to continue mobilizing people, resources, and equipment in order to confront these fires and attend to the population that has been affected.
Fires also hit more than 5 protected natural areas, such as the Laquipampa Wildlife Refuge, home to South America's only native bear, the rare spectacled bear.
Scientists say droughts in South America are more frequent and more intense, and this could be linked to climate change. In Peru, farmers were using fire to clear land for crops, getting ready for the rainy season. But the rains never came.
A special brigade of firefighters, normally stationed at the Inca citadel of Machu Picchu, has been sent to tackle the blaze. The strength and extent of the fires took Peru by surprise.
Cannibalistic killings. We're seeing crime scene pictures from a horrific attack on a Florida couple. The Martin State Attorney's Office released the evidence in the case today, and the highly anticipated toxicology reports show the 19-year-old accused of the brutal murders of that Tequesta couple did not have flocka or bath salts in his system.
CBS 4's Carrie Codd spent the evening pouring through the evidence, and we need to warn you, you may find some of these images and information disturbing.
These are crime scene photos of suspected killer Austin Haroff after Martin County deputies finally subdued the man who displayed superhuman strength on August 15th. Haroff is accused of stabbing, beating, and taking bites out of the bodies of John and Michelle Stevens inside the garage of their home, and then resisting tasers and the efforts of deputies to stop him. This is a photo of the knife investigators believe Haroff used in the crime. It had hairs on it. We can show you these images taken by Martin County crime scene investigators after the killings as they trace the blood trail at the home. But the bulk of the crime scene photos released by prosecutors Wednesday are too grotesque for public view. We're learning that the FBI did not find flakka, bath salts, or cocaine in Haroff's system. They did find some marijuana and alcohol. We're also hearing from some of the emergency crews who responded to try and help the victims. One of them called Haroff the devil.
Get down and quickly assess seemed like me the devil.
That EMT said Haroff said a few things at the crime scene.
He was just coming up saying, F America, just kill me.
The documents released contain a police interview with Haroff's mother and sister after the crime. Haroff's mother said her son was acting strangely that day, and she played an audio recording of her son.
I become like almost immortal. I have to die. I have to die one day.
Haroff's sister said her brother had recently spoken about having superpowers, and he struggled with insomnia.
He was talking about being immortal, running lights, being in front of cars, testing his powers, being half an animal.
And some might argue as Haroff lay in handcuffs that night that he was.
Police in Bulgaria placed the country's largest refugee camp under quarantine, causing tensions with migrants to escalate into a riot. Officials said around 1,500 migrants clashed with police in the southern town of Hermanli on November 24th. Protesters threw stones at riot police. Authorities then responded by spraying fire hoses known as water cannons to disperse the crowd. Reuters reports that protesters damaged several buildings and set fire to mattresses, tires, and broken furniture. Firefighters and additional police forces arrived to provide backup. No arrests were reported. The riot comes 2 days after the refugee center was sealed off for quarantine. Last week, local media outlets reported that contagious skin diseases had broken out among the camp's population. This caused residents of Hermanli to protest for the camp's closure.
Refugees threw rocks and other projectiles at police, leaving several officers injured in the town of Harmanli near the Turkish border. Police say some 2,000 refugees have participated in the confrontation. The clashes reportedly broke out after authorities sealed off the camp and prevented people from leaving their premises due to reports of a disease outbreak.
President Erdogan has warned that Turkey could open its borders, enabling migrants to flow into the European Union.
When 50,000 refugees turned up at the border gate, you said, "What will we do when Turkey opens the border gates?" Look, if you go further, those border gates will be opened. You should know that.
That statement came after the European Parliament MEPs voted in favour of a temporary halt to EU membership talks with Turkey. A freeze in the more than 10-year-old talks was initiated following, quote, the disproportionate and repressive measures taken by Ankara after July's failed coup. Now, relations between the EU and Ankara have recently soured over a number of issues. They include the reluctance of the EU to grant visa-free travel, European concerns over human rights in Turkey, and Ankara's threats to jeopardize the migrant deal. However, at the start, relations between the two sides looked like they had a pretty rosy future.
While Turkey is under attack from terrorism directly and indirectly from all corners of the country and by all the terror organisations and their sponsors, the EU is telling us to change our counter-terror law in exchange for visas.
If President Erdogan decides to deny the Turks the right to free travel to Europe, then he must explain this to the Turkish people. It will not be my problem, it will be his problem.
The death penalty can be discussed by the relevant institutions according to the Constitution, and a decision may be taken.
No country can become a EU member state if it introduces that penalty.
Now, fighting between Myanmar's government forces and some domestic ethnic armed groups continues in the northern part of the country. Close to the Chinese border, both sides are accusing the other of starting the latest escalation. Bullets have strayed into southwestern China's Yunnan province, where at least one person was struck and injured. Our correspondent David Granabon reports from Myanmar.
Several civilians told us that they heard shots being fired on Tuesday morning. Now, the ethnic insurgents say this recent round of violence, their attacks, are because of offenses by the military in the region.
Hundreds of people have taken part in protests outside Myanmar's embassies in 3 Asian countries to demand an end to its bloody crackdown on Rohingya Muslims. These were the scenes in the Malaysian capital, where the Foreign Ministry says it's summoning Myanmar's ambassador over the escalating violence in Rakhine State. At least 86 people have been killed and around 30,000 displaced. Many of these protesters are Rohingya Muslims themselves. They're condemning the violence and criticising leader Aung San Suu Kyi for what they see as inaction.
She should protect the minority, like what even in this country, the minority is protected by the government. So, you see, so she should show an example to the world that she protects the 10% of the Rohingya over there.
Protesters outside the Myanmar embassy in the Indonesian capital went further. They want the Nobel panel to cancel Suu Kyi's Peace Prize award. She swept to power last year, promising national reconciliation. There have been similar scenes in Thailand too, as demonstrators descended on the Myanmar embassy in Bangkok. Myanmar's soldiers have poured into the north of Rakhine following attacks by alleged Muslim militants on border posts in October. The government and military have rejected allegations by residents and rights groups that troops have raped and killed civilians and burned down homes.
For almost 2 weeks, hundreds of Rohingya Muslims have been crossing from Myanmar to Bangladesh, seeking shelter from escalating violence aimed at them. There are allegations that members of Myanmar's military have looted, raped and executed the persecuted minority since military operations began in October. As people continue to flee the northern Rakhine state, the UN says at least 30,000 have been internally displaced. Let's get more on the story and speak to Poppy McPherson, who is following the story for us from Yangon. Poppy, good to see you. Now, the UN accuses the government of ethnic cleansing, which is a very serious accusation. What has been happening that might warrant that claim?
Yeah, it's some extremely strong language coming from the UN, quite unusual, because normally, recently, they've kind of been quite careful about the language they've used to describe what's been going on. But it's reflecting, a very, very serious and worsening situation in northern Rakhine, where now the crackdown and apparent insurgency there after, some unknown, still kind of unknown attackers targeted police last month. That kind of broadened. The army tackled that with a huge counterinsurgency operation, which kind of spiraled into allegedly human rights abuses. And now you've kind of got a humanitarian situation emerging where some of the Rohingya Muslims thousands are reportedly crossing the border or trying to cross the border into Bangladesh to seek refuge.
Tensions have been running high in Bamenda over the past few days. Barricades are still up in various parts of the town. Police and military officials are patrolling the streets, looking for anyone involved in the protests. The government says military reinforcements are helping authorities return the situation to normal. But protesters say they will not stop demonstrating until the French language is no longer imposed on them.
What we want is for France to back off. They should leave our own system. We have a proper means to organize our educational system. We have proper means of our health system. It's a time for freedom. They colonized us, and now is the time. We were mental slaves, but now is the time we are spiritually positive. And the fight is bigger than they can think.
French is spoken in 8 of Cameroon's 10 regions, while English dominates in the northwest and southwest. Demonstrators want these 2 regions to be independent.
News of the missing troops has sparked controversy here. Local media have been reporting an officer and 45 soldiers are missing. They were reportedly driven out of their base in Gashinga, a town in Borno State. Now the military is disputing the numbers.
When there was an attack at that location, we came out and told you about what happened, as of the time that it happened and the efforts that were being made. And we told you a number of soldiers were missing. And eventually, we came out with a figure that 39 of the soldiers were missing. And some of them later on surfaced. So for anybody to come and start banding figure other than that, honestly, I think the responsibility is on him or her to prove beyond reasonable doubt that what he's saying is the truth.
Some of the missing soldiers' relatives have been asked to provide their banking details. This is apparently to enable the army follow up on entitlement packages for the deceased's next of kin.
Whenever there is a death of any officer or soldier of the Nigerian army, there are welfare schemes, there are procedures. Naturally, there are entitlement ranging from burial expenses to benevolent fund and Nigerian army welfare scheme, as well as payment of death benefit and group life insurance, and of course, the sponsorship of the children of the deceased officer or soldier. So these are routine administrative issues that whenever we sustain casualty, regardless of the circumstances, that had to be followed.
The troops had been deployed on an operation aimed at displacing insurgents along the borders of Nigeria, Niger and Chad.
Pakistan says at least 12 civilians and 10 soldiers have been killed in cross-border shelling between India and Pakistani troops in the disputed Kashmir region. Pakistan's military says the civilians lost their lives as Indian troops targeted the Neelum Valley and the Nakial region in the Pakistani administered part of Kashmir. It said 3 Pakistani and 7 Indian soldiers were also killed as Pakistani troops responded to the Indian attack. India says it carried out the attacks in retaliation for those by Pakistan. The two sides have been increasingly exchanging deadly fire since their long-standing dispute over Kashmir escalated in September. Back then, militants raided an Indian military base, killing 19 soldiers. New Delhi blamed Pakistan for the attack. Islamabad has rejected the accusation.
Moving to Iran, and the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has warned the United States that Tehran will definitely react if Washington renews sanctions on the country for a further 10 years. Khamenei said the nuclear deal must not be used to put pressure on his country. In another speech published on his website, Khamenei said the U.S. government breached the nuclear deal on many occasions, but did not elaborate. Earlier this month, the U.S. House of Representatives voted on legislation to extend sanctions on Iran. However, it needs the approval of the Senate and President Barack Obama to take effect.
Russia has rejected U.S. criticism of its decision to deploy ballistic missiles in the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said that Moscow has every right to do so. He added that all current threats to Europe's security are the consequence of the U.S. military policy in the past 10 years. Russian military official referred to U.S. missile defense sites in Europe and the planned buildup of U.S. troops in Poland and in the Baltics. Earlier, the Kremlin said that its missile deployment in Kaliningrad is a response to NATO's military buildup near its borders. Now, on Monday, the U.S. State Department voiced concern over the deployment of Russia's Iskander and S-400 missiles to Kaliningrad. It described the move as destabilizing to Europe's security.
Now, the European Parliament has adopted a resolution seeking to counteract propaganda by third parties, which places Russia and ISIL on the same footing in terms of perceived international threats. RT's Peter Oliver has been following the debate, now joining us live from Berlin. Peter, why does the bloc want to counter Russian media?
Well, why they want to do that we'll come to in just a moment, but what we do know is that they've certainly voted in favour of this motion, in this favour of this resolution to counter EU anti-EU propaganda by third parties. 304 MEPs saying they were in favour of it, 179 saying they were against it, with 208 abstentions. Now, I was listening to the debate last night on this particular question, and some of it was rather venomous when it came to Russia.
We are at war with Russia. We are on a collision course with each other, traveling faster than a jet fighter.
Russia has tried to damage the EU. The enemy is pushing its narrative hard.
The Kremlin wants to split Europe. It forces its information into our countries.
What the Russians and extremists don't like is freedom.
Russia and ISIS share the same aim. They're toxic.
From 2 farms in Jeollanam-do and Chungcheongbuk-do province to see whether this strain could be transmitted to human beings. An official at the Agriculture Ministry's Animal Health Division said the virus appears to have been carried by migratory birds, but they're also looking into whether it was spread from farm to farm.
A meteor that lit up the night sky on Monday night still has a lot of folks in the Bay Area talking. Now, according to the American Meteor Society, 150 people reported seeing that fireball across Florida. Dozens of people flooded their social media timelines with a lot of pictures and a lot of videos of that. News Channel 8's Jamel Lene is joining us now live from the South Florida Museum in Bradenton, where scientists cannot stop talking about this, Jamel.
Same thing, he said he thought he was crazy.
Turns out they weren't the only ones seeing things. Dozens let their cameras roll, not knowing they would capture the meteor later. Jeff Rogers with the Bishop Planetarium in Bradenton said this one entered the atmosphere the size of a soccer ball near the Keys.
A 7.0 magnitude earthquake has struck the Pacific coast of Central America. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake occurred around 120 kilometers off El Salvador at a depth of 33 kilometers. It rattled the region just as a hurricane barreled into nearby countries as well. There were no immediate reports of damage from Thursday's quake. The Central American country is situated.
That's right. Good evening, Rod. You know what, scientists tell me that these types of meteors, they're very common. We just typically don't see them because it usually happens in the daytime or out over the ocean. But Monday night, we got lucky. Monday night, a meteor lit up the sky. Venice police officer Aaron Mungavin saw it around 11:15.
I was driving actually west over to the island of Venice, and the interior of my car lit up really bright, and I looked up and it looked like there was just a little firework actually just over to my left.
One of the officers captured the fireball on his dash cam.
It just was going down very slowly, and then I drove over the bridge. I saw another officer over there, so I went and spoke to him, Officer Ben Neff, and he said the
The government has issued a 48-hour emergency ban on all movement to and from the nation's poultry farms to stop an apparently growing outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said today the standstill order begins at midnight early Saturday morning and runs through late Sunday night. The ban affects locations including farms, slaughterhouses, and animal feed factories, and it applies to people, goods, and all vehicles related to the livestock industry. 6 cases of the H5N6 virus have been confirmed in the past week. The authorities are testing samples